Schmerzen kennt. Ich werfe ein Licht in mein Feuer frei. Was in Lust verbrennt. Ein heißer Schrei. Bang. Bang, bang. Gefährlich ist der Schmerzenkelch. Ja. Hey. Gefährlich das Leben. Hey, bang, bang, Feuer. Bang, bang. Bang, bang. Feuer frei. Bang, bang.
Few series in the history of gaming that I'm a total nut for and have been a lifelong fan of since its inception is the Metal Slug series. Everybody has their favorite side-scrolling shooters. You have the Contra fans, the Mega Man fans, the Strider fans. For me, it will never get any better than Metal Slug. The combination of beautiful and detailed sprites, intense action and violence, over-the-top comedy, funny catchphrases, and gigantic bosses is unbeatable in my book. I'll be covering only the main arcade titles, choosing to omit the portable games for Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, and the Neo Geo Pocket Color. Yes, I did even own one of those as well. This is going to be so much fun. I love it! The original Metal Slug was released by Nazca Corporation in 1996 for the SNK MVS arcade hardware. Now, Nazca was eventually absorbed into SNK itself, but let's go back a couple years before the nuclear bomb that was the Neo Geo. 2 years before Metal Slug was created, and history was made, Nazca released another series of games in the same vein. This series was known as Gun Force. It was only 2 games, but let's focus on Gun Force 2. I've played this game, and since I played Metal Slug before I played Gun Force 2, I figured Nazca Corporation had just copied Gun Force. Come to find out, they were both made by the same company. If you look at both games side by side, the similarities are clear and very noticeable. The background art details are very close. And even the sound effects were carried over to Metal Slug. While this was a mediocre release by Nazca, little did we gamers know what the future held at the time. Now, back in '96, the Neo Geo arcade machines had been around for a couple of years, and by this time the first 2 games in the Samurai Showdown series had been released, and we were all eating it up. I'd have to wait another 4 years before I would become a proud owner of the Neo Geo AES system, but until then the arcades were still plentiful. I remember I first discovered Metal Slug at a local movie theater about 30 miles away from my house. I had never heard of it before, but I had a few minutes before the movie started, so I decided to drop a quarter. Long story short, I ended up missing the first 20 minutes or so of the movie because I couldn't pull myself away, and this was a movie I really wanted to see. It was just so much fun, and I think that's why the series, more or less, has remained strong over the years. But enough of this history lesson, let's get down to the shit. The grandfather of the entire franchise. You'd think just by watching the intro that this is just another arcade button masher. Shame on you! As soon as the game begins, you're dropped into enemy territory and have to start kicking ass by any means possible. It isn't really stated in the game, and honestly I didn't even know there was a story until I hit my 20s. I figured it was just all a coincidental adventure. Nope. You're part of an elite group called the Peregrine Falcon Squad, sent in to stop the tyrannical General Morden from world domination. In the original game, you only have the choice between two characters, Marco, who is player 1, and Tarma, who is player 2. Tarma is my personal favorite, and I always play as him in later games, mostly because of his cool sunglasses. The controls are very simple. Button A shoots your weapon, button B jumps, and button C throws your grenade. Now, one of the first things you'll notice about the game, and one of the main contentions that fans have with the game, is the blood. In the arcades, at least in Japan, the blood is on. For the North American release, either the AES home version or even the MVS arcade game, the blood is changed to sweat. It's a really lame change that SNK made because it doesn't make any sense. Why, when you waste a bad guy, would he explode in a massive sweat? Those soldiers must have sodium levels off the scale. Luckily, SNK allowed arcade owners and fellow gamers to turn the blood back on simply by accessing the BIOS menu and re-enabling it. It seems like a simple thing, but after playing with blood for so long, it's very distracting not to have it there. And I think it takes away from the total game experience. Composed of only 6 stages, the game has the right amount of length, as it's all-out action from start to finish. As you move through stages, killing and destroying everything in sight, you'll come upon different weapons. These include handheld weapons like the machine gun, rocket launcher, flamethrower, and shotgun. They're all useful in their own way. The absolute best part about the weapons, besides the fact that the shotgun totally obliterates anything, the announcer's voice!
Mission 1, start!
You only have the grenade throughout the game, as other throwable weapons like the Molotov cocktail would be added to later games. Then, we have the most important thing in the game, the thing to which the game and the series itself owes its name. The Metal Slug. Being that this is the first game, the Slug variations aren't that many, as opposed to, say, Metal Slug 3, which has about a dozen different models. Metal Slug is named after the small one-person tank. It features side guns and a large cannon on top. It's a fun little vehicle. One of the neat things is that it can also jump a short height as well. It can take a few hits before the alarm sounds, and you have to jump out before it explodes. As a last-ditch attack, you can also do this move before the tank takes too much damage, causing it to dart across the screen and ram into enemies, destroying itself in the process. Throughout the levels, you'll come across POWs who are tied up. If you free them, not only do they increase your score at the end of the stage, but they'll usually drop a weapon or food for you. At the end of each stage, you'll face a huge boss, most of the time either covering or nearly covering an entire section of the screen. The levels are pretty varied, from forested areas to snowy mountains. Throughout the levels, there are also secret items and hidden POWs which can be revealed by shooting certain areas. The game features the first appearance of one of my most favorite characters, the crazy machine gun toting Alan O'Neill. You face him midway through stage 3. Why do I like him so much? Because he's fucking hilarious. He says funny one-liners like, "Come on, boy," and "See you in hell." Plus, his laugh itself is really funny too. One of the main things the game also has going for it is its art style and the attention to detail. The Metal Slug series has some of the best sprite animation you'll ever see in a 2D game. Even small things like Marco's breath or his screaming into a walkie are done very detailed, and you can tell the developers really put a lot of care and effort into the visual style of the game. Overall, the original Metal Slug is a fantastic game, and the series could only go up from here on out. Even to this day, over 15 years later, the AES home cartridge, if you can even find one, easily goes for over $1,200 on eBay. That says a lot. As with most sequels, Metal Slug 2 improved on what worked and changed what didn't work about the first game, which wasn't much if I do say so myself. The sequel continues the story of the first game, with the Peregrine Falcon squad going after General Morden again. This time the General has decided to form an alliance with Martians in order to better his odds. The Martians would be Metal Slug staples for the next few games, and I prefer the alien influence instead of just the normal regular army. It features a larger array of level settings including deserts and caves. Released in 1998, the game came out almost 2 years after the launch of the original PlayStation, blatantly going against the 3D powerhouse and easily confirming the popularity and validity of 2D games at the time. New to the series is 2 female characters you can play as, Eri and Theo, who would also return in many of the following sequels. The art style hasn't been altered that much, but it didn't really need to be, and the character animations are as fluid as the first. Additions to the weapon lineup include the laser, complete with the silly blow your hair back animation, and the fire bombs, which are very useful against groups of enemies. There are also additions to the Slug lineup, featuring the first animal slug, the Camel Slug, the Slugoid, or as I call it, the Jumper Slug, and the Slug Flyer, basically a Harrier jet. Yet another first in the sequel is the physical transformations, whereby if you eat a lot of food in a short period of time, you turn into a fatter version of your character. While in this mode, your weapon fires a sized up version of its normal ammo. Funny thing about fat mode is that for melee, instead of attacking with your knife, you fight with a fork. Again, SNK adds wonderful humor to the game without getting silly. Near the end of the game, you end up joining forces with Morden's army against the aliens. As expected, you are successful. Metal Slug 2 is usually remembered as, or more notoriously known for having significant slowdowns that can severely hamper gameplay. As you can tell by the gameplay footage, this is actual gameplay. I haven't slowed it down or altered their speed at all. But you can see how slow sometimes things get. These were rectified a year later with the release of Metal Slug X. Sergeant Rumi, or the Wandering Ghost, as she's affectionately known, makes her debut in this title, dropping supplies or weapons to help you while she's wandering around. If you'd like to play this game without slowdowns all the time, just play Metal Slug X. It's the same exact thing, but it's a lot more enjoyable because of the changes that SNK made. This game, while not technically a sequel in the Metal Slug universe, is considered the third release in the series. Even though the game is a re-released, slightly updated version of Metal Slug 2, I like to think of it as its own standalone game. The majority of the game is the same, with minor changes such as daytime to nighttime conversions, and enemy placements have been altered. Newly added to this upgraded version are new weapons, the Enemy Chaser, Drop Shot, which I still hate to this day, it's completely useless, Iron Lizard, and the Super Grenade. The The super grenade is probably my favorite of the new weapons, as its destructive power and blast radius is awesome. Enemy Chaser is also really good, especially for boss fights and attacking enemies that might be below or above you. The slowdown has been fixed entirely, which makes this game a lot more enjoyable than its predecessor. The first Metal Slug of the new millennium, and goddamn does it show. The third entry in the series, released in 2000, and again picks up right where Metal Slug 2 left off, or Metal Slug X if you're going by release chronology and not storylines. Basically, the same alien force you fought in the last game returns, and you have to kick their asses. There are a few surprises throughout the story, so I won't spoil them here. Eventually, you team up with the regular army again, and launch an assault on the alien mothership itself. Killing off the aliens once and for all.
Diminish the self-principle that leave its toxic trace. Once and for
The most notable addition is the branching system throughout the levels. In each stage there are multiple paths that you can take in order to reach the boss. It adds tons of replayability, and along these paths you'll encounter the majority of the new slugs in the game. These include the Slug Mariner, a small submarine, the Elephant Slug, the Ostrich Slug, the Rebel Armor Slug, the Slug Copter, Astro Slug, and lastly, one of my personal favorites, the Slug Driller. The Driller is just badass, especially when you power drill one of the large worms and it explodes into a shower of purple slime. It's kind of a shame you only get to use it during a branched path in one stage. My other favorite is the Elephant Slug, mostly because of its special attacks, including fire and electricity, and because you find him in the Cave of the Yetis. Why do I like the Yeti's cave? Because the Yeti is kinda scary but also cool. Okay, sometimes the freezing breath can get a little annoying, but if you're lucky enough to kill one on the top ledge and it falls off, you'll witness the biggest explosion of blood ever. I think in the entire series. There's a good diversity amongst the levels, with the zombie stage being fun as hell. Turning into a zombie sucks, but at least when in this mode, and hitting the grenade button allows you to unleash one of the coolest attacks in the whole series, the Vomiting Blood Geyser. The funniest part about this attack? It uses the same enemy growl from the original Doom that the Yetis do. Which makes it sound a little dated and corny, but I think it makes it even cooler that way. The bosses are designed well, and none of them, besides the final boss, are terribly difficult. This was the last Metal Slug that the original SNK worked on. They would file for bankruptcy within 2 years, and quite a few challenges after that, but you can really tell that the artists and developers really put their all into this title, and you can understand why in hindsight. Mega Enterprise, a Korean-based games company, released Metal Slug 4 in 2002 during SNK's bankruptcy proceedings. This was possible because Mega acquired the rights to publish SNK titles before SNK went belly up. Thus, they still had the legal right to continue on while SNK was in the shit. Speaking of shit, Metal Slug 4. Yeah, I don't really want to say that, considering how big a fan I am, but let's be honest here. Metal Slug 4 is pretty much the black sheep of the franchise. The game feels very unpolished and almost cut and pasted together. FYI, this is exactly what Mega did. Since the kick-ass team of artists from the first 3 games were in limbo because of the bankruptcy, and Mega didn't feel like hiring them, Mega made Metal Slug 4 using elements and art pulled mostly from the previous games. Basically, Mega didn't know what the hell they were doing and expected this jigsaw puzzle shit of a game would sell well based on the franchise. Most fans saw the blatant lack of originality in the title and have stayed away from it for the most part. Besides all this other crap, I personally don't like this game because you can't play as Tarma. And that always sucks. The storyline is simple. A terrorist group called Amadeus is planning on carrying out a massive cyber attack. Marco and Theo are sent in along with 2 new characters, Trevor and Nadia. Nothing really special about them, I just resort to playing as Marco in Tarma's absence anyways. The only new weapon this time is the 2-handed machine gun, and consequently it only appears again in Metal Slug 5. There are a few new vehicles added like the forklift and the walking machine, but no actual slugs. Overall, I consider this game a letdown. It doesn't really add anything memorable to the series, and after I beat it a few times, I rarely play it anymore. Thankfully, SNK finally got its shit together and ended up merging with a company called Playmore, thus becoming SNK Playmore. In 2003, the newly formed company released its 5th iteration in the Metal Slug series. And you better believe with SNK back in the driver's seat, this is the old Metal Slug that we all loved. All new stages with new backgrounds, not recycled shit. And I always felt the humor element was back to a somewhat usual level compared to Metal Slug 4. Metal Slug 5 also sees the return of Tarma as a playable character.
Yeah! Mission 1, start!
SNK Playmore pretty much removed the vast majority of things that Mega added to the game series, thereby bringing the series more back to what we knew it as. The Ptolemaic army steals a secret disc that contains information about the Metal Slug project. Once again, the original Peregrine Falcon squad, being Marco, Eri, Theo, and Tarma, are sent in to retrieve it. The usual enemies are nowhere to be found, including General Morden and Alan O'Neill. This removal does slightly affect the feel of the game, as most enemies are masked, but not by much. The game starts off in a jungle stage, and like the POW truck driver in Metal Slug 4, here a POW is rowing the canoe for you. I especially like the first level boss, as it's a giant evil Metal Slug. I remember back when the game came out, everybody in the online community was freaking when they showed screenshots of that boss. There aren't any new weapons to speak of, which sucks, but there are at least 3 new slugs. Again, they are nothing really to write home about, but the slug gunner is kinda cool. This was the last Metal Slug ever produced for the Neo Geo MVS hardware, and it's kinda sad to admit that. Metal Slug had been one of the flagship series on the Neo Geo hardware, and to a certain extent seems out of place on another system. We finally come to the end. This certainly isn't the end of the Metal Slug saga, but it is the end of the console releases. Released in 2006, nearly 6 years ago. Come on, SNK Playmore. Metal Slug 6 was marked by many firsts once again. It was the first Metal Slug to be released on the Sammy Thomas Wave hardware, the first departure from the SNK Neo Geo MVS hardware. You'll notice this difference mostly in the audio and to a lesser extent the graphics. The individual sprites resemble their predecessors, but the backgrounds have been completely overhauled, looking much crisper, but at the same time losing a little of the classic look. Actually, if you look even closer at the backgrounds, you'll notice that they're at a much higher resolution than all the foreground characters and items. which is a little jarring because the two visual styles kind of clash. The story is akin to Metal Slug 2 and Metal Slug 3, with everyone, formerly enemies, teaming up to face a greater threat, except this time the aliens are also on your side. Also, just like in Contra 3, you now can carry two weapons at once and cycle between them. Added has been a new score multiplier that, when maxed out, makes killed enemies drop coins to further increase the player's score. Expanding the roster by two new characters again, Ralph and Clark, each character now has specific attributes like more damage output or longer life bar while in a vehicle. Speaking of our favorite mode of vehicular destruction, a few new slugs appear in this release. The Donkey Slug, similar in action to the Camel Slug from Metal Slug 2 and X, the Slug Digger, and the Slug Gunner prototype from Metal Slug 5. Overall, a great game to end the arcade releases on, but still isn't able to trump Metal Slug 3 in my playbook. The changes are subtle enough not to be a nuisance, but enough that you know that they're there. Especially in the audio department. Like if you listen to the POW when he says thank you, that's been altered from how it's been for the last 10 years. The announcer's voice is different. Even the sound that the soldiers make when you kill them, that's been changed too. But again, this is just taking advantage of the newer hardware. I hope you've enjoyed this review of the Metal Slug series. It's been a lot of fun for me to create it and share with all of you my thoughts and memories from this truly fantastic series. If you haven't played any of these games, please try any of them. You won't be disappointed at all. SNK really has created one of the best series ever. Each game is total fun from beginning to end. Thanks for watching. Go check each and every one of them out.